Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the March edition of My Soko. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us on this session. And today it's all about purpose. So I'd like to invite the first of our panelists. But before we go there, let me tell you a little bit about My Soko. This platform was set up for the marketing fraternity in Africa, an opportunity for us to chat about marketing trends, the profession, what's happening in this space, how we can influence, change, improve, and share our learnings across marketing within the continent. So this month of March, we chose purpose and marketing and purpose-led marketing as our theme and topic. And with me today is Graham. Graham is joining us from Nairobi. Graham Villiers-Tuthill. Hi, Graham.
Hey, Carol. Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
We're really glad that you could join us. So, Graham, lightning speed, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that you've worked in Asia, in Europe, and you've now fallen in love with Africa. So
Yeah, definitely. So I've been with Diageo for 15 years. I started out as a graduate trainee in Ireland, worked for Europe with Diageo for 7 years. And then I worked in Singapore, Indonesia, and for the last couple of years I've been in Africa. First, leading the Africa side of the Guinness Global Brand Team. We have half the Guinness in the world sold in Africa, across West and East Africa. So that was a really awesome job and my first real interaction with the continent. And then for the last 2.5 years, I've been marketing and innovation director at East Africa Breweries Limited, EABL. Based in Nairobi, EABL has presence across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. So yeah, really privileged to work on local brands like Tusker and Bell and Serengeti, and also some of Diageo's global brands like Johnny Walker, Guinness, etc.
okay, that sounds really exciting. And somewhere in there, obviously marketing has shifted quite a lot and everybody's kind of talking about purpose. I got a couple of calls after my LinkedIn post saying, listen, we almost went back to bed. Like, we had to think about, why do we wake up every morning to come to work, and is it meaningful? And I just wanted to understand, we're seeing a huge amount of, brands and companies being purpose-led.
Yeah.
How do you understand that space, being a marketer for so many years?
No, it's a really interesting trend, right? And I think it's hot in terms of whether purpose is helpful and simplifying and empowering for brands and for marketeers, or whether it's can cause confusion and cause brands to stray into areas and conversations that are maybe outside of their tram lines. So I think it's a hot topic. I mean, for me, I think about purpose across three different facets of corporate life. I think increasingly companies are becoming purpose led. So I think that is really aimed at companies clarifying what they stand for stakeholders, be that government, employees, regulators, investors, etc. I think increasingly that trend of corporate purpose is a big driver for how companies communicate themselves to their stakeholders. I think obviously brands are far on the journey of being purpose-led. Some on different areas of the scale, depending on your personal philosophy of the power of purpose for driving brand growth. And then I think, leaders are starting to get much more used to the language of purpose, what they stand for, how they lead teams, how they inspire and motivate people. So I think increasingly in leadership, purpose is becoming something that's quite to the fore for people.
Exactly. And I was reading a study by Deloitte, and I'll quote them verbatim. They say purpose-driven companies witness higher market share gains and grow 3 times faster on average than their competitors, while achieving higher workforce and customer satisfaction. So it's actually an amazing space. You would think it was intuitive that you should just have a purpose and, get on with it. And I'd like to also introduce Fatima Alimohamed, a Pan-Africanist who has been roving around the continent for many years, passionate about marketing and passionate about driving in COVID. Hi, Fatima.
Hi, guys. I'm sorry. I just landed at the airport and I think I got the timings wrong. So, literally, in 2 minutes, I'll be sitting on a chair and talking to you. But I'm glad to be here on time. I just got in from Kigali, and thank you for having me here. And great to meet you, Graham.
Great to meet you, Fatima.
Awesome,
Great. Someone...
awesome. So we'll wait. We're glad you're still in the continent safely, and
Yes.
yeah, we'll wait for you to stop roving. I just say you're roving in the continent.
I've just reached the house, so literally give me a minute, and I'm just going to get myself seated.
Awesome. So we were just talking around the idea of brands and leaders wanting to see purpose as an important part of what they stand for. But do you think that there is an opportunity for brands to build real purpose? Like, is there really a space for brands in this?
No, I think there is. I really do. Like, I am one of those marketing professionals who is pretty passionate about the importance of purpose. I mean, for me, purpose, if it's founded on the core truth of a brand, is really powerful for driving brand growth, and it's really simplifying for consumers. I guess when I think about great brand purpose, I think about some of the parts of brand marketing that are maybe old-fashioned. Maybe I'm old now. It's possible that I'm just an old marketeer. But in fast-moving consumer goods, I think we're very keen to dive into tactical activation of brands, promotion, and execution and price, and all of those good things that can stimulate tactical growth. I think we are maybe less intentional and less diligent than we need to be around diagnostics. And for me, proper diagnostics, looking at, for example, the true brand roots that are informing people's understanding of the brand, looking at the real product proposition, what is true and distinct about a product offering that you're bringing to market, looking at the type of brand personality you want to develop for a brand, the tone, the touch points. Those are strategic pieces of work that, of course, you can't immediately say will increase your sales in Carrefour by 20%, but they are how you start building out a strategic positioning for your brand. And I think if you combine that with a really rich and resonant consumer insight, you can use those parameters to build out a great brand purpose. And when you do that, I think you do unlock growth.
So you raise a really important point, because I think you said that we've kind of defaulted as marketing into the tactics. And I would imagine that because we default into tactics, we now determine that our tactics are our objectives, which is very, very different. And maybe the job to be done is to go back to understanding why does the brand exist in the first place. And within that space, there is no room for tactical stuff. Otherwise, purpose looks like it's another exercise to be able to drive sales, as opposed to something that the brand truly believes and stands for. And we see it a lot. And I was just talking about that, are there any good examples that you can think of brands that are really winning in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always hesitant to roll out the classic, brand examples of things like, Nike and Apple and all of those big brands. But for me, a litmus test of purpose is, can brands react to what is going on around them and be agile enough to put themselves in culture in a way that's consistent with how consumers expect them, to enter a conversation. And that's why I think getting those diagnostics right is so critical. If you spend time and energy building out that brand positioning and building out that brand purpose and ensuring it's both true for your product and resonant to your consumer, then I think it's a big enabler to be fast and be agile. And in these COVID times, we're all being told to be more agile, do more with less, and be much faster in how we react to emerging consumer trends. That's really only possible, I think, if you've done an awesome piece of diagnostic work and you're very clear, on the brand you're standing on top of and that you're managing, because that frees you up then to be really, really active. But I do think brands like, brands outside of the alcohol category, let me choose, brands like Nike, etc., are brands that are confident and bold in their tone of voice and how they address issues as diverse as, inclusion and diversity, and also things like Black Lives Matter in the US. And they can respond to that with authenticity, and I think with credibility, because consumers are very clear of what that brand stands for. They're very clear of that brand purpose. So it really, I think as a marketeer, that would massively free you up to be putting your branding culture at more pace, more often. Obviously, where you have a right to speak, I think that's important. Not every
and that's
brand.
critical. I think what's happening
Yeah.
is, with the advent of social media, everybody thinks they not only can they have an opinion, but they must say something.
Yeah.
Because there is pressure to be seen to be saying something, whether you're relevant or not in that conversation. And so purpose starts being watered down a lot. Something that should be an ideal and also should be a big benefit to society and community. And talking about society and community, we have Dr. Fungai, who is from World Vision. Dr. Fungai. Awesome. Good afternoon. You are now in with us.
Okay, thank you very much. You can hear me loud and clear?
We can. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Graham and I were just having a conversation around the idea of having a purpose that is useful to the community. And Dr. Fungai Makoni is actually with World Vision. I think has been very passionate about WASH. For those of you who are within that space, it's water, sanitation and hygiene. Did I get it right?
Correct. That's correct.
Awesome. And obviously during this COVID period, that's been a big conversation, globally, especially within the continent. But the question I had for you was, as a nonprofit, I think the idea of purpose for you is intuitive. So what can commercial brands learn about doing things, with authenticity and for community?
All right. Thank you very much, I know Carol, for bringing me to this occasion to just share with colleagues. Yes, your question that you raised is very pertinent, particularly when I look at our organization being a nonprofit. So one thing that stands out vividly in terms of how we are structured as a nonprofit organization is we do have a very global strategy that is very clear, communicated and practical. And the second thing that we as an organization, as World Vision, that stand alone as number one is we know who we are. And as World Vision, for some of you might not know, we are a Christian organization that is child focused. So which means our focus is on children, and our purpose is to see how we can make our promise to the children that we need to save the most vulnerable children. So what stands out for us basically is we really articulate our promise, what we want to deliver through our vision, our mission, and our strategy. And for us, what we stand for right now is we want to build better futures for vulnerable children. So when you look at that and our identity as a Christian organization, we want to save all people regardless of race, ethnicity, or gender. And this is well inspired by our values. So we have got this very critical key values that we stand by. One, we are Christians. One, we are responsive. One, we are good stewards. One, we value people. So when you look at all those things, we encourage that culture between our staff and the communities we serve, that we are people-focused organization, bearing in mind that our thrust is basically to look at the lives of the children such that they have life in its fulfillment, which is central to what we do.
So
I hope I've given you.
Yeah, you raise an important point, and I'm going to ask Graham about this. Graham, do you think that there is perhaps competing priorities, profits, and for a profit-driven organization, when profit isn't your core, as it were, I think all business is there for profit, so it is indeed a purpose. But do you think there's a conflict between doing good and making profit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be very challenging to have disconnect between what a company's purpose is and then how a company behaves. And I think that's a really dangerous thing for all of us who are in executive teams and in marketing. I mean, a lot was written a while ago about Starbucks, who on the one hand have obviously a purpose that's around investing in communities and building communities. And I'm just using Starbucks as an example. But on the other hand, they have a corporate tax scheme that maybe doesn't always deliver against that purpose, depending on which community and geography you live in. So that's a real risk, right? If you're head of marketing for that organization, you're obviously trying to transmit a certain set of values. And I think you need real alignment across senior executive teams to make sure that what you are saying a company stands for or a brand stands for, and in this case, they're one and the same, is really delivered to the consumer across how you pay your taxes, across how you engage with government, across a corporate and social responsibility, as well as through the propositions that you deliver to the market. I mean, Diageo, the company I work for, we talk a lot about celebrating life every day, everywhere, for everyone. And I think the Diageo have done an excellent job of living that value in employer brands by having a very progressive maternity leave and paternity leave policy across the world, by having one of the most diverse executive boards in the FTSE Top 100, and by having an extreme and consistent focus on building gender and ethnic diversity at all representative levels of the company. So I think if you're going to have a purpose and put it out there, you've got to be able to back it up with your HR policies, your tax policies, and that's a genuine challenge for companies around the world.
Yeah, to be able to walk the walk. Fatima, I was going to ask you, Fatima's worked across several categories across several African markets. And my question really is around consumers. Do they really care? And if they do care, what is the expectation of brands that claim to be purpose-led?
Sorry, Carol, could you repeat that, because I couldn't hear you clearly?
Did we lose you? I was saying that you've worked with a lot of consumer brands across multiple markets, and you've had a lot of experience around brand marketing. But do you think consumers really care? Do you think they care that there's this whole purpose-driven initiative across brands? And if they do, what do you think is their expectation?
I think they care more now than ever. And obviously the pandemic really has been able to expose a lot of brands and organizations, because I come from the space where, and I say this a lot of times, when we talk about CSR, and most of the times the CSR in the past, pre the pandemic, was corporate social responsibility, but more from the basis of cosmetic social responsibility, because people were focusing more on how can we help or try to lift people up, but let's just take photographs and let's get PR articles and let's get covered, for doing good. Then came in the pandemic, and I think the start of the pandemic is where there was sort of a concern by corporates to let's help. But if you look at it, I think there was also a lot of inauthenticity in it, because a lot of times brands took advantage of the fact that if they were in a space where their kind of product was going to be able to drive the agenda or was going to be linked to what they were doing, they took full advantage of that. And that there were those that genuinely did make an effort. So I look at it from the perspective of consistency and authenticity. Are able to be authentic all before the pandemic, post the pandemic, and continue to work on that basis. And I think now brands are exposed because they know when a brand or a corporate is trying to push brands down their throat. they're they know it openly. They know that when it's something being pushed down them. So they're interested to now see, what are you doing? I mean, we talk about, people, planet, and profit, but it's also gone to the perspective of, what are you doing for me? What is this brand doing to be able to elevate me from the problems that I have? So are they able to do something where it is helping me in terms of my health? Are they doing something where it's going to take care of the community that I'm a part of? Are they doing something to take me out of the problems that I face right now? So, for example, in today's day and age, if you were running a promotion, for example, as a brand, and you decided that we want to award a car, a Mercedes Benz or a Toyota, that is inauthentic, because right now we know that brands should be focusing on the challenges that consumers are having, which, for example, is paying school fees or paying rent. So for me, the purpose is going to come in from that perspective of authenticity, but a consistent authenticity. And Graham picked that up, and Doctor as well, is that yes, as much as there is profit, it's also understanding that you are doing good with the expectation of a loyalty coming in as you go along. And I think it's more so important right now on the continent, and we're seeing it more evident than ever before.
So I think you raised the issue of authenticity, and maybe Dr. Fungai, as a nonprofit that has worked in this space for a long time, how do you think this move? How can we help brands as they build purpose into their communication to make sure it's actually meaningful to the community? Given your experience, where do you think the gaps and the opportunities lie?
Yeah, thank you very much, Carol, and also Fatima, for really raising this very important, critical aspect. Because the space where I'm coming from, in terms now looking at the marketing, and then from the development of point of view humanitarian, she raised a very critical point. What is in there for them when they look at a brand? So, from where I'm coming from, we understand and tell our story of impact. So when we look at brands, we need also to have that kind of relationship with a brand. Do I understand? Can we tell the story of impact together? So that is number one. And then secondly, this pandemic has really told us to learn a lot of things, both the private sector, the international NGO world, where we are now realizing that going it alone is not going to be the way to solve solutions. But I think the value of partnership right now has come to be an essence. Looking at if this brand is going to give added value in terms of livelihood, how does also our value coming from a humanitarian point of view blend it together so that we can take those people from the level they are to the next level, where we would want to see that even for them as the clients, the brand, they should be able to continue, being patronage and also being served by the brand. Again, allow me just take a little bit about water, where I'm coming from as a sector. We have realized that water played a critical role in sanitation during this pandemic. But before that, people never thought how people can come together to ensure that people have water, adequate sanitation and hygiene. But we realize that when we sit together now in our closed enclaves, we realize that we need each other to ensure that we save the people, for them to be able to be good clients for them to survive, to be able to be clients for tomorrow. For example, many of our partners, particularly right now, for me, I'm an advocate for driving for private sector engagement. Some of our partners didn't believe that there is a value in actually partnering with NGOs. But in this period, I think we have realized that we need each other, particularly in terms of creating these small scale private sector entrepreneurs at local level, which can also be translated into the improvement of livelihoods, improvement of household income through a basic need and a product that can work together, both of us and also by our private sector companies.
It's interesting that you say that. There's a study that was done by Jim Stengel. In fact, he wrote a book about it. And he actually demonstrates in that book, through a study of about 50,000 brands across the globe, that there's a direct correlation there's a cause and effect correlation between brands that actually work towards improving people's lives and their profits. So the question has to be, and I think one of the biggest learnings that marketers can take out of nonprofit is the conversation is around impact. And when brands are not really talking about impact, there is absolutely no way that, can demonstrate that whatever profit numbers are taken to be able to improve other people's lives can be demonstrated in the growth that they immediately see in consumers wanting to utilize or use their brands more. So I think that's a critical point that you've raised there, is why are we not discussing the impact story in terms of some of the things that we're doing as brands, and the whole idea around leading with purpose. Fatima raised it, and I'd just like us to talk a little bit about that. This, where does, for example, in Diageo, the CSR department sit? Who is it sitting with, and how is it interacting with the rest of the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point that Dr. Fungai raises. I think more and more and more consumers are aware, as Fatima said, about the impact that companies and brands are having in society. Information is more transparent and readily available, but also consumers are clear on what they want. They want brands that have a positive impact on environment. They want brands that are behaving responsibly, both to their employees and to their stakeholders. They want brands that are delivering reasonable and positive tax so that we're building communities together. I think alcohol is always an interesting industry to think about with corporate relations, because it's so broad. So corporate relations is hugely important for us. We have a quite robust corporate relations team, and sometimes when I'm feeling overwhelmed in my marketing world, I look over at the corporate relations team, and it makes me feel a little bit more relaxed, because they deal with they deal with such a huge amount of things. I mean, for us, it starts with ingredients. It starts with grain. In Kenya alone, we buy from 47,000 farmers. So we have a huge obligation and responsibility to a community that is mostly small farm holders spread across the region, and incredibly important both for our products but also for the communities that they live in. And then we have to think about our production process. We have 5-6 breweries across East Africa. We have distilleries across East Africa. They obviously, are net consumers of water. So we need to think about our water efficiency and effectiveness rates. We need to think about our carbon footprint. All of this 15 years ago when I started in marketing was really not something that you would be very concerned about. But I think it's imperative that people who run the brands in the company are connected with the corporate relations team to understand how we can improve that. And you're seeing it in investments. In EABL last year, we announced a $200 million investment around improving our water efficiency and our carbon usage. Now, that money, you might say, has nothing to do with marketing. On the other hand, we know consumers want brands to be more responsible in this space, want brands to be more progressive in this space. So I do believe that's really an investment that will pay dividends for our brands in the future. I think that what we can learn a lot from the NGO world in private sector is that point around transparency and impact, and also how we better communicate what we're doing. I think you're seeing a lot of new brands in new categories, brands like Tom's Shoes or brands like even Patagonia, that are really premised on having sustainable impact at the core of what they offer. I think for maybe the more historical industries like ourselves, where we have brands that are 250 years old with Guinness, or 100 years old next year with Tusker Lager, we have to work very quickly to catch up. And I think we can learn a lot from the NGO world about both what to do and then also how to communicate it and express it to consumers and stakeholders well.
Yeah, so you talked about, the new brands coming in, the recent brands. And I think maybe this question I'll pose to Fatima, who's worked across, many different brands across many different markets in the continent. Do you see that, leadership is willing to be able to, first, talk around the idea of, being really purpose-driven and purpose-led, both to their internal and their external stakeholders, even with old brands?
I think it's a very, very good question. And it's really interesting, because I feel the disconnect normally is from leadership to the people internally a lot of times. Obviously, if organizations have policies, I mean, obviously, if you take an example like Diageo, We know that they have fantastic policies, that trickle down. So you get into the system and you work with the policies that are in there. This tends to be different with different organizations. So you do realize that at the top you have leadership that has the right vision, wants to take the company on a purpose-led journey. But then there ends up being a disconnect. I mean, I'm trying to play two different scenarios here. So obviously Graham is already speaking on what is already happening with great companies and those that have it as policy. So I'd like to present the other side of the coin, where you and again it goes back to authenticity, because if an organization does not run purpose within the organization in terms of how it manages human capital, how it relates to certain issues, for example, women who've given birth, paternity leave for men, just basics, in terms of support if you know that one of your employees is going through domestic violence, for example, mental health, which is the biggest issue and discussion that's going on today. So when you find that is not really trickling down, or is really not being able to present itself, if you spoke to any of the employees, have a different image than you took to the consumer, then there is a gap. So I feel there's still a lot of area of improvement, especially for new brands that are coming up, and even those that probably have been in the system for too long, who have been working more from the perspective of our job is to just make sure we sell and get a throughput and be able to increase market share. It now needs to move into measuring the impact. And I love that fact, because most of the brands that I work with, most of my clients, that's what I drive now. I'm not interested in knowing whether you are going to have the number one market share. Obviously, I want to strive and get you to that, but I can only do that if I create an affinity, if I create a love, that is time immemorial within the consumer who's picking your brand. And because they believe you are now understanding their needs. And if we take a situation, again, I go back to the pen, because this has really been an eye opener for not only businesses, for governments, for consumers, everyone, because there was no plan. We didn't come in with a preparation of a strategy of what is it we're going to do, So it's the perfect canvas right now to paint a great picture, to understand what is it that we need to do. So, for example, social impact right now, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, all right? These are the people that are hit, if you look at from a brand angle. So whether it's an SKU size, a price point, or quality. So I would like to see organizations now being put on KPIs and metrics that is able to measure their performance in terms of social impact and doing good. Okay, because until and unless a consumer tells you that it's coming from them and they feel that you've actually done good to them, you stood by them. We're not talking about charity here. It's not about charity cases. It's about saying that I walk this journey with you, and my brand is going to play a role in elevating you over issues that you have. So down to the individual brands.
Okay, I think there was two areas there that I kind of want to hone in a little bit more on. Dr. Fungai talked about it earlier, to say that they're anchored, their business is anchored on very clear values, and because they have very clear values, they have very clear, their KPIs are measured against the values that they set for themselves, and maybe in brand marketing, brands again always want to stand for something. They want to stand for something in the mind of the consumer. Even companies want to stand for something. And do you think that the idea of brand values is becoming diluted in kind of a very short-term thinking? And so we actually don't have enough time to let those values take root, because every time something shiny and new comes about, off we go. Graham, what's your view?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think we measure, and look, I'm really not saying we have this perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but in Diageo we look at three things when we talk about brand. We look at distinctivity, we look at salience, and we look at meaningfulness. And what we've found is you can have a very salient brand. You can have a brand that everybody knows about and it's top of mind. But if you don't have a level of distinctivity, which really sets you apart from your competitive set, and then critically, and I think this comes back to what Fatima was saying, if you don't have meaningfulness that is both true and positive, then you are really not going to be as loved, as desired, as purchased as brands that do offer that. So that kind of trinity of having, yes, a lot of salience because you have to be top of mind, particularly if you're a very high turnover category, but you really do need to balance that with having distinctivity. And there are some brands who are just innately distinctive brands like Guinness because of their their proposition. Other brands have to work a lot harder to build out that distinctivity, and then that meaningfulness. So what do you really stand for? And for me, that's the true test of purpose. Can consumers connect with, this is a brand I know about it, but I also know what it stands for. I also suspect I would know what its perspective on things would be. So those three matched together, I think, are critically important. And just to go back, just for 1 second on Fatima's point, I think the importance of nailing it. I totally agree. It's not about it's not about charity, and it's not at the cost of profit. I increasingly think as well it's about talent attraction and talent retention. I think people who are very desired by the market, they want to work for brands that are more purposeful. They want to work for companies that are more purposeful, and they want to work for leaders who have a good way of describing and clarifying their purpose. So if companies want to secure the best talent and work with the best and brightest across the continent, I think they're going to have to really put emphasis on purpose in a transparent and authentic way.
And that's really, I think, at the heart of it is, we had the millennial study in 2019, and what it said to us was that more than 60% of them are not interested in profit and are actually willing to take lower pay for purpose. They want to see that the company stands for something, and that's more attractive to them than what's on the table. Obviously, there has to be some commensurate pay. But it was quite a surprising statistic to look at. And I think we're seeing that trend, going globally. But people are attracted to companies that are doing good, and people want to be part of a company that looks like it's going to be successful for the future because of the things that it's doing. And that also, Dr. Fungai, how does that work in nonprofit? We're talking about commercial companies. They've got great advertising. They've got massive budgets. They can put it out there. They're always on television. How does that work for people like World Vision, where your job is not going to be to run fantastic advertising to be able to draw your partners?
Yeah, exactly. I think my colleagues have already alluded to that, the issue around for purpose and value really drives us, particularly when you look at World Vision. What is our identity? What is our culture? What is our values? So when people look at that and then they align themselves to those values, I think that is something that basically drives a lot of people's, in most of us, it's a calling coming to World Vision, where you want to sacrifice part of your time to ensure that you make a meaningful change in somebody's life. And that gives you more value if you look at most of our, our stuff that works around us. And the other thing that I also want to highlight here is that we have chosen to learn from each other across all of partners. There's so many things that are going on, but as an organization, I think one thing I've learned is we have chosen to learn from ourselves and seeing how we implement, how do we interact, because we've got different geographical locations, different cultures, different ethics, but how do we navigate ourselves into those spaces to be able to make an impactful change? And the issue about listening is one thing that we have, us as an organization, have learned to. We advocate for gaps and needs. We understand the people. We take much time to listen to the people. We work with them. We take along with them and co-create along with them. So this is the thing that we have now seen in the last few years, particularly in terms of sustainability, governance, and future, investments. That's why we want to see how does the private sector come in to help those people that we have already changed their mindset in terms of seeing that there's value in doing something, because we are coming from an era, for particularly in our area, where it has been more of a donor dependent syndrome, where donor dependent syndrome is actually incapacitated communities to be what they are. But we are now shaping up our mind and saying, I think communities have got the capacity, they've got the ability, they know what they want. So then the empowerment of those people, particularly looking at the values that we are going to at the end of the day, can help us to really advocate on those gaps and the needs, particularly in the areas where we would want to make sure that there is a change in the meaningful lives of those people.
Okay, so I think you've said 3 things that any brand marketer should be doing. You talked about listening, you talked about meeting with the people, and you talked about co-creation. Why is this a problem, in marketing? Why are we struggling with this? Because I think this is something we can definitely learn from nonprofits. Fatima, Graham, any thoughts on that? Real deep consumer insights.
Yeah, I think it's a super point. I mean, one thing COVID has done is shaken a lot of the normal rhythms and cycles of FMCG marketing. So I think there are going to be some positives that come out of the COVID crisis from a business management point of view. I'm super reluctant to say that COVID is in any way a good thing, or I hear some people say a blessing in disguise. I know if you've had COVID or lost someone with it, it is none of those things. However, from just purely a business and brand marketing perspective, it's a disruptor, and in disruption, there are some things that you learn that I think will stick and be positive. One of them, I think, is to that exact point from Dr. Fungi around agility of consumer understanding. In emerging markets, the impact of COVID was, I think, much more pronounced than in other markets where perhaps government paid furloughs and people found it easy to stay at home and work from home. We operate in a different type of market, and in East Africa, restriction of movement often means a restriction of income. So the impact of COVID, on consumer was much more dramatic than, for example, the US or the UK. And that required a much more dynamic and iterative read of consumer trends. So we've gone from being quite a formulaic company in how we get consumer research to having a much more rapid and dynamic sense of consumer and where they're at. And I think the great thing about working in Africa, be it West, East, or South, is technology really enables us to leap ahead. So really, no matter the scale of company, SMS research, fast, rapid check-in research with the proliferation of both data and mobile phones can enable any brand manager or any corporate to get a very dynamic read of the consumer. I think that's been very good certainly for EABL throughout COVID. And I suspect we're going to stick with that kind of more informal, more rapid, dynamic consumer research even after COVID, because this idea of listening and really knowing where the consumer is at is critically important. And our markets are volatile. Today it's COVID, tomorrow it might be unexpected natural or political events that throw a curveball at us. And therefore, I suspect the need for really dynamic consumer understanding is going to be always relevant and present for us in Africa.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key to it. I was going to ask Fatma whether, does she see that there's a difference between whether you're a big company or a small company? Can purpose be part of the core of any size company, and how does that benefit them?
Hi, Carol. I'm really sorry. I have no idea what's happening with the network. But if I've heard you correctly, you want to know if there's a difference between a large company and a smaller company in terms of driving purpose. I don't think there should be an issue or a difference at all, because purpose is like love. You can't decide. Who is allowed to love and who isn't. I'm just making it in a simplistic manner, because I don't want to repeat what Graham said. There's going to be a lot of changes that are going to happen and is already happening, and we're moving now from speaking even in lingos, the kind of stuff that we as marketers used to talk about, you know, business to business, business to consumer. Now it's all about edge to edge, human to human, you know. So we've come to a different space now. And what we also need to understand is if we talk about the target audiences, and I know EXP, I remember you guys were ahead of the curve on this. I think it was 2 years ago, you did a program and a research on millennials, you know, and I remember attending that event, and that was one of the most insightful events that I went through. And I mean, I have a millennial as a daughter, and these are the future generation, and we're talking about already 2 years, 3 years ago, they were already showing signs of they were only going to support brands that were sustainable, brands that were doing good for society, brands that were environmentally conscious, you know. And if you look at a lot of companies, including Diageo, you know, and big brands, you know, clients that you have like Coca-Cola and stuff like that, are already looking at stuff like sustainable packaging, you know, talking about issues to do with weight management, sugar usage, you know, stuff like that. I think the difference is if you talk about the bigger companies and the smaller companies, the difference here is the budgets that the bigger companies have, so that they're able to communicate more, speak about it more, you know, talk about what they're doing. I think that is where the challenge is for the smaller companies, that they haven't really gone out there to say what good they're doing. I'm sure they are, some of them are. But I think it should be all community driven. Everything does not have to be about social media and media. If you make a difference in the community that you are playing a role in, whether it's in modern trade, you know, general trade, word of mouth tends to still work, you know. And
Right.
if you're not communicating with somebody, so to answer your question, I don't think that this is something only meant for big companies. In fact, the smaller companies are closer to the ground, so they should be able to drive this faster.
So we can agree in this instance, size does not matter. So Dr.
No.
Fungai.
Oh, yes.
Dr. Fungai, you know, talking about your partners, you know, what size of partners do you attract at World Vision?
Yeah, we do have varied partners from big corporates, from big donor agencies, and also from, you know, local-based entrepreneurs. We call them commit-based organizations. We have got quite a range, but basically what we have learned right now through the past years is that the valuing of partnership, whether it's a big size or a small size, what is the most important thing is partnerships is at the heart of us as an organization. We value, because one of our core values is we value people. So whatever the case may be, one of the issues we value that partnership, whether big, small, or local-based communities, we treat them in the same way we treat also the bigger partners.
That's awesome. So are we allowed to name, you know, did you think of any brands that you think can be celebrated for having taken the lead in this, especially in the continent? I know it's easy to find the global brands because, you know, they're pretty loud, and maybe some global brands also have local initiatives for the brands that they have in market. Can you think of some examples that, you know, anybody would like to share of a brand that you think is really doing a good job of leading with purpose?
Maybe let me have a go. Okay, maybe Rami can go in.
No, sorry, Dr. Fungai. I didn't mean to cut across you.
Right.
I think, given my East Africa bias, I think I'm always very impressed with Safaricom in Kenya. I think they have a kind of a clear role in society around, you know, empowering people, and they're clearly both from a tech point of view and a financial point of view quite an enabler in terms of utility for consumers. So I feel like Safaricom do a very nice job in Kenya around, you know, expressing their purpose. I also thought during COVID, a lot of the Unilever brands did really well. I think brands like Lifebuoy kind of really stepped into the fore around both what their products can do, and then, you know, maybe around people's attitude and really engaging people to step up and you know, drive the sanitation that would help during COVID. But I think one thing I've been very aware of and impressed about is the public-private response to COVID across Africa, which feels different to maybe Europe and the US. I think almost every major multinational company or major local company contributed to government response, and I do think there's a lesson there around partnerships and collaboration that hopefully will be carried forward post COVID. Brands as diverse as Unilever, or companies rather as diverse as Unilever, Coca-Cola, and ourselves in the breweries, donating sanitizer, donating transport, helping with logistics. I think there is something around the spirit of togetherness that is powerful and has helped, I think, maybe the region come out or manage through COVID a lot better than originally people anticipated.
Yeah, awesome. Dr. Fungai?
Of course, Graham also touched on something that I also wanted to share around, looking at our sector, Unilever doing some fantastic work, with the brand for sanitation. But let me just take you a bit of diversion, particularly when you look at other non-financial kind of partners that we have experienced ourselves in our sector of humanitarian. We have seen a growth and an interesting, kind of partnership, particularly when we looked at this COVID era, particularly when you look at the local leaders, the faith leaders, the role they play in advocating for change, advocating for impact. We've seen such another kind of level of approach, particularly if you want to have sustainability and acceptance, particularly when involving the faith leaders, involving the local leadership. And we have realized that the people tend now more to listen more to their local people rather than listening from affluent or kind of higher level people, politicians, but the local people themselves, like the faith leaders, local leaders. We have seen kind of another trend in terms of driving change or driving information for change using this particular kind of partnership. And I think that's something, again, I don't know how brands can use that, but I think for us it has worked, particularly let me just give an example, in our wash sector. We have been moving away from all this donor syndrome, putting in things. But again, now we have tried to engage that water costs. To bring water to the people, it costs money. So even at whatever level you are, there is need of a contribution that you need to put in terms of maintaining the sustained water supply. And we have realized that getting these small enterprises at the local level has helped in terms of the operations, the maintenance, even the upscaling of those, and also the linkage between these small enterprises, the big brands like Grand Force, Woodrow Palms, who have come up with initiatives to create a value chain to support these people. And also Safaricom as well came in terms of the mobile payment methodology, in terms of governance and revenue collection. We have seen that kind of partnership going on. And right now, again, we're also trying to negotiate with the insurance company, because we as partners, we are coming in with high tech for a poor community, but I think the insurance also plays a critical role, particularly for the sustenance of those water systems in the long run. But what we have seen is the leadership in these people, when they acknowledge it and allows us to form these small entrepreneurs, we have seen a great change in terms of how these things are managed, as compared to what used to before, because they were just thinking, this is from a donor, this is World Vision borehole. But right now, it is their borehole, because they are now on it, and they know that providing this is a cost, and they can make money out of this, using the supply chain and everything that can come in through, like the Safaricom, the Grand Force, governing this supply chain for supply. So there's that kind of change that we are seeing in terms of partnership, and seeing how that cycle can involve quite a number of people, apart from the different big institutions, but also the local institutions. You have a say in terms of how this can be successful going forward.
That's fantastic. That's really good to know, because it's very inclusive and it helps, the communities build communities. Fatma, can you think of any brands that you
Well, Graham mentioned most of them. I mean, in all honesty, I think Unilever, Safaricom, Diageo, especially as EABL, Bitco, which is obviously a local company, they probably were in the forefront of a lot of things. I mean, Chandaria Group as well did some phenomenal stuff. But to be fair, again, I think these are the ones that were seen on the media. There were a lot of other private sector organizations, NGOs that came together. And I think the beauty of this, and I must say kudos to the private sector and even to the NGO sector like Rotary, the kind of stuff they did. But what it clearly showed, and to what Dr. Ari also said, is that collaboration, I think, driver of any purpose-led initiatives. And this pandemic, as much as, yes, like Raham said, we don't want to use words like it was a blessing in disguise. I still maintain it is in a way, because it's actually shown the human side of all of us as individuals, that should we want to come to, we can. I mean, if you talk about even situations like when we've had terrorist attacks, it clearly shows how brands have come in, corporates have come in, as a society, we've come in together. So it means each one, as an organization, as a brand, as an individual, the purpose is there. It just needs to be ignited. And maybe.
I think we lost Fatma there in her passionate appeal to all the brands to get involved and find their purpose and lead with purpose, because I think there are lots of situations where we do find brands that claim that they have purpose, but they're not necessarily leading in that way. Sorry, Fatma, we lost you when you were appealing passionately.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's the network. I'm really sorry. I've just come from East Africa to West Africa, and I think my phone is trying to adjust itself. So I'm really, really sorry. But I think, look, at the end of the day, I think a lot of organizations need to go back now to the drawing board and reevaluate their purpose. They may have it, but they probably just now to recraft it and refine it, because ultimately love wins, and brand love is where it's all at. And like Graham did talk about, the meaningfulness, the distinctiveness, the saliency. I love that, because that's ultimately what it's going to tie down to. So we just need to go back to the drawing board and see what is it that's going to be able to connect, human to human.
Right. So I think just a couple of takeaways that came out of this session for me was that, purpose is not something that you do as a marketing PR initiative. It lives with the brand in everything that the brand does. And really it should come across, not just in the way that we as the leaders and the managers of the brands are, but also how the brand appears to the consumers. We don't have to market it for consumers to know about it. It needs to be part of what the DNA of the brand is, and so therefore how the brand lives in every interaction point. I think that was really important. I think there's a lot we can also learn from the nonprofit, which, as Dr. Fungai is talking, we're kind of thinking about it as marketers to say, look, this is really some of the things that we should be doing to be able to ensure that we're kind of aligned to the idea that we're becoming more purpose-driven and more purpose-led in terms of our marketing. Also, Graham raised the issue around, we're quite quick to fall into the tactics, and, having a real focus on the diagnosis will help us to be able to establish exactly what that purpose was in the first place. And how does that purpose then, come across in some of the things, even the tactics that we do as marketers. Fatima also shared with us the fact that size doesn't matter. Big or small, everybody has a contribution to make. And there's a general agreement, that doing good is good business. So there should be more businesses wanting to do good, not just to their external stakeholders, not just to their internal stakeholders, but also to their external stakeholders. And I was hoping that we had a couple of questions from, we had one question. So the question is, how do we integrate operations day to day with purpose? Or are these two things separated? Anybody have? Yeah.
So I think, like I rightly said initially, it has to start from within. And more importantly, I think I want to add this thing, and I'm sure Graham is going to agree with this, and you, Carol, because you're both marketers. And if you as the individual that is writing the brand strategy and you are working on marketing, if you do not have a passion to want to also make an impact and to want to be able to change lives, it's not going to translate in whatever strategy you work through. So it starts with the individual working behind it. it starts with the organization and the purpose that it has, walking its talk, and then being able to reach out to the external people. So I think they go hand in hand. They cannot work in isolation.
Graham?
Yeah, I totally agree with Fatima. I think, you want, as a brand marketing person, to be the general manager of your brand. You want to have end-to-end responsibility, and the real risk of separating purpose from operations is that you say one thing and do another. And I think in the current consumer environment, that's really unforgivable. So they've got to be integrated. You've got to be super connected and curious as a marketing person. And to have that impact Fatima's talking about, you've got to have, a sense of the organization being aligned to the purpose you're building.
Dr. Fungai?
Yeah, I can agree more to my colleagues that basically, keeping people at the center of whatever you do, whenever your brand you're developing, is the key essence in terms of really making that impact, and that, over what you call long-lasting impact in the lives of people you want to change. Talking from my point of view as a humanitarian. So separating, yes, of course, there are issues, but again, they have to go hand in hand in terms of whatever you do in operations. Does it translate to make sure that you're putting the people, your client, at the center of your interventions?
Fantastic. This was such a great hour. A really well spent hour. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I always say that, it's one of the most precious commodities that we have. And so when anybody gives off their time, it's really a special gift. And when everybody gives off their time and their knowledge to share, that's more than we can ask for. So I'm really grateful to all of you for accepting to be here, for spending an hour with us. For our audience and those who joined us in the webinar, we're really thankful. We hope that in some small way, you'll take away something coming out of this webinar. And as we go into marketing, that we really become driven around our core purpose, not just to our internal stakeholders, but also to our external stakeholders. The team from Silverstone, Mark, thank you very much for hosting this webinar. And until April next month, it's been real.